Hey, and welcome everyone. I'm Greg Pollock, Director of Research and Insights at UpGuard, and I'm excited to host today's Fireside chat with Dr. Kane Tomlin, the Chief Information Officer at Mississippi State Department of Health, or MSDH as I'll say for short. Dr. Tomlin has a remarkable career spanning cybersecurity, national security, and emergency management. As the CIO at MSDH, he's leading a modernization program to deliver citizen and patient-focused solutions. A former U.S. Army master diver and Iraq veteran, he's also an educator, teaching at institutions like NYU and NC State, and as a National Security Agency instructor. A lot of amazing experience there. Today, we'll explore MSDH's approach to cybersecurity, including their threat landscape, the challenges they've faced, and the innovative strategies they've implemented. So let's dive in, no pun intended. Or I guess the pun is intended. Anyway, Kane, I know one of your philosophies or mottos is security without tears. Can you tell me what that means in general and then what it means in practice for you all?
Sure. So in general, I think the concept that I arrived at with the security without tears is basically trying to leverage a little bit of my, we'll call it pre-cybersecurity background in the implementation of a cybersecurity program. So I'm a software developer prior to me joining the military. So I came about this in kind of a weird situation. But in essence, what I want to do is make sure that at all times our security team is balancing the user friendliness with practicality, right? So everybody that's involved in security should know basically we create friction in the operations of the organization. Like no matter what you do, there's always going to be friction when you add security. So it's unfortunate, but it's the reality. So when we know what those friction points are, right? Once you've implemented your program, done all that stuff, that phase two, that security without tears, is going back into those friction points and really identifying, addressing, and improving to the best degree possible within those friction points. So I kind of like to use the analogy of CI/CD, for those of you that have never heard that term, continuous integration, continuous deployment, development, however you want to look at it. It's a software nerd thing. But as it applies to cybersecurity, right? So CI/CD for cybersecurity, haha, it rhymes. But we're not stopping once we've reached compliance, right? We're actually continuing that improvement process in order to reduce those friction points and pain points. So that's kind of the non-technical concept, right? And then how we apply that depends on different situations. So automating stuff, pushing user self-service further to the front end. So kind of embracing ITIL and embedding ITIL and IT service management processes in our security policy. So for example, I hate big walls of text. So our policy, we've broken it up and published it online in our service management tool, but everything is clickable. So as you're rolling through and you're like, hey, this policy says thou shalt not surf Netflix, and I really need to surf Netflix, there's a link right there for you to request your exception. And we treat those as like service catalog items. So if you have an incident, you kind of follow that security breach process. But if basically what you just need is help from IT security, we can kind of capture it in that way. So that's sort of, in a short version, kind of where that security without tears is trying to get us to.
And since that sounds like it's really about getting buy-in throughout the organization, so that, like you're saying, people view security as an enabler rather than a friction point. How have your peers or who else have you worked with to kind of like socialize or circulate that approach?
So definitely within the Mississippi Department of Health, also in some of my academic areas with the college here that I teach for, trying to implement those policies. And kind of the running joke, I tell people, I'm a philosophical anarchist. So for those of you that don't know what that is, that's nonviolent, right? But if a rule is dumb, I don't want to do it, right? And so in my opinion, once you reach a little bit of that senior leadership within an organization, that's your opportunity to kind of take some of those pain points and go back and try to readdress them. So within the academic world, kind of looking at trying to improve that process, removing those frictions. And then, matter of fact, I was teaching a CISSP class last night, and one of the things I like to mention is, in order to do a business value analysis and an impact analysis as part of your risk assessment, you got to go through all your internal processes. What an opportune time to go through a round of process improvement during that process. So I said process a lot of times there, but the gist of it is that we're never happy until we've removed all the friction from our security program, and we know we can't remove all the friction from the security program. So that's where that kind of continuous improvement mindset comes from.
Yeah. So I mean, that leads on to, I guess, my follow-up question about, so practically speaking, you've been going on a maturity journey, identifying some points you can improve, not trying to boil the ocean, but improve one thing, get it working, improve the next thing. And I guess if you could take us through the security maturity journey of MSDH, what processes, what tools, what you've gone along the way.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually was brought on to the agency as the security officer. So I was the security nerd before I became the IT nerd. But when I first got to the agency, this would have been 2022, we had passed all of our required compliance, HIPAA in our case, HIPAA and FERPA in the case of healthcare. So we were compliant, but in my opinion, it was like in the most difficult way for us to do it as an organization, possible. So very manually compliant, if you will. So that's kind of where I started. And then in essence, through that concept of sort of the CI/CD world, or agile DevOps, whatever you want to call it, looking at, okay, what's the biggest bang for my security improvement buck, right? And in our case, it was onboarding some supply chain security, which just so happens to be how I met you guys. So I didn't, have a supply chain security system. So we wanted to onboard one, but the key for us was to onboard one that, again, wasn't going to make everybody's life more difficult. So we got to onboard one that simplifies, not complicates. And so we kind of went down that road. We've got some tools that are less siloed, more integratable. So basically your full REST API kind of capability for suites. And then we really did dive into the capabilities of those tools, where those tools had best practices that were an improvement over what we were currently doing, in which case, you want to steal whenever possible. And then kind of breaking down those silos between. So for example, in UpGuard's case, we borrowed liberally from your vendor risk policy template, and we integrated that with the tool set into our information security policy around supply chain risk, and then integrated the workflow, if you will. It's not done as well as I would like yet, but basically where we're capturing from the vendor onboarding side the data that we're going to need to ultimately do that supply chain assessment without impacting the project sponsor, let's just say. So in essence, you want to buy something, you want to buy UpGuard, you think it's really cool. They're not a vendor in our system. So as soon as you become a vendor, that starts drilling into the vendor risk management policy. We get your initial security score. We kick out that survey if we need to. We bracket you in a tier that controls what type of goods and services that you can provide the agency. And all that happens transparent to the program area that is trying to procure it, as opposed to, I don't know how the best way to say this, as opposed to maybe the more traditional government way of where you just send it up, get told no, edit some things.
Yes.
So edit, and then eventually you find the right code to get past that checkpoint. We're trying to put that on the front end so that people don't get told at the 11th hour, oh, by the way, this is a tier 1 vendor and their security score is very low and we need them to remediate these 500 vulnerabilities before we can do business with them, that kind of thing. And then, so that was a big pain point for us because we're so vendor heavy, right? Procurement heavy, with the type of tools that we need. And then again, kind of coming back around and saying, okay, now what? Okay, now what? So we've solved this supply thing, but our users still are having a hard time finding the security services that they need. Bam, we bring in the service catalog, and you just continue that process over and over and over again.
We got a question that I know we're supposed to wait for the end, but it's relevant to what we're talking about. So I figure let's answer it now while it still makes sense. From Rebecca, what was the most important non-negotiable requirement for the supply chain risk management tool?
Ooh, that is a darn good question. So I would say a combination of two things. One, external pen test automatically, right? I don't want to have to go through a technical, definitely not a procurement, but I don't even want to have to go through a technical process and get, one of my security folks to go in there and do it. So UpGuard, bam, kind of automates that initial pen test, vulnerability assessment, and then the ability to have historical information in the form of both the questionnaires and the remediations, right? I'm not looking for labor. I'm looking for partners, right? There's vendors that have areas of expertise that I don't have. So I want to see that journey. I want to create that partnership and see that journey of maybe you started out and there was a lot of room for improvement and you took our security program seriously. You inculcated it into your own operations. Your security score is improving. Now maybe you want to bid on something that's closer to a critical system for us, something that's much closer to our central operations. Now you can bid on those because you've gone through that journey with us. So another area that I think in my experience, anecdotal evidence anyway, sometimes our local, state government, maybe federal government partners aren't necessarily looking for those partnerships. They kind of want to dictate terms, and I feel we want to flip that script because, like I said, I don't want to have people do things for me. I have my own employees that can do that work. What I need is that expertise and those best that I don't currently have or know about, right?
I'm also it's another question I'm curious about. Just what's the scale or approximate number of vendors that you're dealing with, either in terms of like the total program scope or like per unit time? Like what's the scale of the vendor risk challenge here?
It's so variable for us. So in Mississippi, which is a little bit different than a lot of other states, the Department of Health covers a lot of things that would otherwise go to different agencies. So we have obviously health facing. We also provide clinical services. So we're a healthcare provider in addition to being a public health entity. We have a academic arm that does stuff. We have professional business and licensing, wastewater, like all kinds of kind of weird stuff. So because of that, the upside is you get like a lot of interesting problems that you have to fix or deal with, but it makes it hard to sort of forecast that. But what we did do is established a critical systems list. So basically, the closer you get to our core data and our core operations, the more critical that system becomes to the agency. So we've got about 30, 40 of those. We have about 50 vendors that are kind of operating in that tier 1, tier 2 space. So it's not a huge number, but it's not a small. And some of our other initiatives will probably lead to additional partnerships as we try to, following the same CI/CD process, start to onboard more advanced technology, AI, getting a data catalog, data labels, things of that nature. As we kind of reach sort of the end of our internal expertise, going out, finding those partners, moving that ball forward. So I imagine in a given year, we probably do close to 100 IT related contracts or contract renewals.
I'd love to have you back in the year to talk about AI specifically, because that is something that on many fronts we're talking about the kinds of risks that can pose with vendors, and then how you make choices about how you accept or don't accept that risk.
Yeah, and that's a whole other can of worms. But the other thing is, what are the use cases, right? So AI right now has got proven use cases for increased productivity, hyper automation, making your data scientists more efficient, right? Because they're not writing SQL, they're able to use AI. But I haven't seen that magic scalable value add out there. I think everyone's still searching for it. So it'll be interesting to see what the next year brings for sure.
Yeah. But on the topic of something that I do know that you have been working on, and that is closer to the present, I wanted to ask about threat intelligence at MSDH. And it kind of sounds like you said, you start with compliance, you get compliant, you have to do that. Maybe you do it inefficiently. Then what you've been doing is maintaining compliance while making it more efficient and like pleasant for the people doing it. And then you have capacity to move on. It sounded like threat intel is one of the areas where you've been really like extending your capabilities.
Yeah, and that for us especially, probably the biggest first step was those silo reductions. So if you piecemeal your security program and along with your technical maturity, one of the negative side effects of that is you end up with a bunch of sort of data silos or system silos because you're engineering these things to not have data leaks, but that also means they don't talk to anybody else necessarily. So when we got sort of stability and got that compliance moving into some proactive threat intelligence kind of things, what we had to do was look at all the existing tool sets that we had from a threat intelligence standpoint, and then depreciate or retire those tool sets that did not have the capability to integrate into some sort of unified threat management feed, and then onboard some new tools that had that capability. But ultimately, the goal is to pipeline that threat intelligence data into a single system. And so the amount of deduplication and trying to reduce that data fatigue has been a huge initiative that we've been working on. We're not where I want to be yet, but we've got a lot of progress, and that really is focusing on if I have to log in here and I see IOC or CTE for patching, vulnerability, whatever, and I have to log in over here to patch it, that's a no-go, right? We want to figure out how to tie those two together so that once I see the threat, I can act on it, and the remediation, the run book, is happening automatically. And again, UpGuard is a part of that because we want UpGuard to proactively alert our security operations center when those vendors have those vulnerabilities. So the SOC is focusing internally, UpGuard is paying attention to our external supply chain, but the threat intelligence we want to be fed into the same input, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Well, we've had a lot of really good questions in the chat, so I'm going to move over and start trying to get through some of these. It looks like one of the higher voted ones is, do you use the UpGuard vendor risk score directly as a selector, or do you augment it? So I guess when you're looking at a vendor, how do you use the score and what other signals do you use?
No, that's a great question. So in my opinion, I don't like to put specific tool names or vendor names in my policy. No offense, UpGuard. But in my vendor risk policy, I do reference the security score so that it's very unambiguous. They're very clear thresholds. I think 700 is ours for my tier ones and 600 for tier twos, just off the top of my head. But we don't say UpGuard security score. We say you must have a security score greater than this. And we make sure that the remediation portion of it is also there in policy. So we bring on a new vendor, we do their initial score, it's a 600. I say, hey, if you guys want to be able to provide this service, we need you to be at a 700. Here's the list of vulnerabilities that you would have to remediate. And again, we capture all that in the tool, and that helps us really understand that vendor supply chain journey along with everything else that's going on.
Yeah, and as far as engaging with vendors at that point to getting them to take action, like obviously I've spent a lot of time using the UpGuard platform, and I know that when a company has a score of 600 or below, they probably have quite a laundry list of issues to choose from that they should remediate, probably many of, but to get a better security score, they have a lot of options as to what's wrong with their attack surface. What are the responses you get from vendors when you say, hey, your score is low and here's why? How does that interaction take place?
That's another darn good question. I would say 80% are very positive. Um, if you're a vendor and you think about this as a free service that you're being provided by the agency to do a quick vulnerability scan on your web presence and your web application, and I think most of them kind of feel that way. So they kind of look at it as, hey, thank you. This is great. I've got some action items that I can work on. They're very clear, measurable, remediation efforts. And then you probably get about 20% that in essence really just don't want to deal with it. And they would prefer to just never have. And again, security is friction. I get it, but they just don't want to deal with it and would prefer to not be there at all. And that's why the policy that we implement is so important, because then we don't get forced is not the right word, but we don't get forced into doing business with a partner that is ultimately not going to be a partner. So, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a little mini job interview too, because if you can't be bothered to improve your supply score, then how do I know that you're going to respond to our, service requests or SLAs or anything else?
Right. Yeah. All right. I think we have time for one quick question. And from Natasha, do you have any tips on trying to get vendors to respond to questionnaires specifically?
The best advice I could give you is front load as much as possible. Your maximum point of leverage from a negotiation standpoint is on that very first meeting with the vendor, right? Because as far as they know, you're going to go throw them $300 billion worth of business. And obviously making stuff up, but it's they don't know. It's like, hey, the sky's the limit. So that's your maximum point of leverage. If you front load it and you get them to agree on that initial first couple of engagements, it's less of an issue in my experience to get them to respond. And being an old project manager type, I jokingly, but I'm very much not joking, when I meet with the vendor for the first time, like, hey, you guys know what the iron triangle is, right? Good, fast, cheap, pick two. I want all three. So just as long as we're clear from the get-go, that's my negotiating starting position, right? Obviously that's impossible, but it helps break the ice a little bit to let them know, like, my goal is to get as much out of you as I can as quickly as I can for the least amount of money that I can spend. And that's okay. And you're a vendor and your goal is to, earn a profit, build a long-term partnership with a customer and all that kind of stuff. And it is what it is. So let's not mystify it or talk around it. Let's just be real blunt and get right to the meat and potatoes of it. And I've personally found that to be pretty successful.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. That the beginning of the process is the maximum point of leverage, and that's where you foresee issue. All right, cool. We are at time. So thank you, Kane, so much for coming on, sharing your time and your insights with us. It's been a pleasure, and I truly do hope to talk to you again sometime.
Awesome.
Cool. To recap, some of the key takeaways were about making security a part of people's lives that is pleasant for them, balancing speed and usability, and sort of having that CI/CD mentality with your approach to improving security processes. To all of our listeners, viewers, I hope you found this session insightful and practical. If you have any additional questions, then you can please feel free to submit them, and we'll do our best to follow up with you offline. And that wraps up today's summit. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event soon.